Hey guys, what's up? It's Ripe again. In today's video, an entitled Karen claims to be a poor single mother despite having a fancy car and expensive clothes. She steals the keys to my property to let her kids trespass on my property and use my pool. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the stories. So I was neighbors with a family where the mother was the worst human being on the planet and the only thing kind of keeping her in check was her husband. A couple of years after I moved in though, the two of them got a divorce and honestly, I could not blame the guy for wanting to get far away from her. They also have two kids that are pretty young and still live next door, so the Karen seems to have gotten full custody of the kids sadly. I don't think the kids are bad or entitled because I never see them acting out, just following what their parents are telling them to do. Once she got divorced, she would go around to the neighbors asking for help and complaining how hard it was being a single mother. One neighbor told me once that Karen sometimes just left her kids in her driveway for the neighbor to babysit even when they had no kind of arrangement. Then got out of paying any money because it is just so hard being a single mom. I know that is not easy by the way, but she was milking it for everything it was worth. She tried to get other people to feed, watch and give things to her kids with the excuse that she was a single mom and it was hard. I might have felt a little bad if I didn't see her new expensive car and designer bag and clothing. It was clear that she was well enough off and just did not want to take care of her own kids. I could sometimes hear yelling coming from the house and something tells me that it might have been her yelling at the kids and not at somebody on the phone. I told myself if I ever heard crying or screaming, I would call the police, but it really seemed like she was yelling on the phone because I never heard a sound from the kids. I have a pool in my backyard and Karen has been spending all spring and summer once the weather got warm to let me have her kids come over to swim in it. I flat out told her no because it was my pool and I was not comfortable with other people using it. Besides, her kids were so small that I did not know if they could swim and I knew she would vanish and put me in charge of two kids. I don't even know CPR if something happened, so I was not putting myself at risk. I had a gate with a tall fence that there was no way she could just climb over, so I was not too worried about her sneaking in. One day at work though, the police showed up asking for me and I was so scared I thought I was gonna pee my pants. They told me that somebody was pressing charges against me for child endangerment and I had no idea what they were talking about. I told them I was at work and I did not have or ever take care of kids at any time. I guess they realized I had no clue what was going on or just took pity on how pathetically scared I looked because they seemed to drop the tough guy persona and tell me what had happened. It turns out that Karen had stolen the gate key from me without me knowing and had went into the backyard pool with her kids. Of course, she told the story of how I gave her the key and permission to take her kids there anytime. Apparently also claiming the yard was perfectly kid safe and they could not get hurt. Honestly, I am surprised that the kids did not end up drowning because I would bet anything she was on her phone or went back to her own house and left the kids unsupervised. The police told me that since it was clear that I was not there, they could not arrest me for endangering a child. As far as her being on my property, it was unfortunately a he said she said situation and would not go anywhere. I decided that I was gonna get revenge on Karen and the best way to do that was to get rid of the one thing she had and would use to get anything she wanted. She clearly did not care about her kids and only wanted them to play the helpless single mother card. I was gonna try and get the children taken away from her and hopefully given to the father. He was the one I would always see the kids playing with when he lived with them and seemed to care more about them. I talked to a few other neighbors that she takes advantage of and asked them if they would file official documentation of the things that Karen does for CPS. For mine, I mentioned the incident where she broke into my pool and her kids got hurt because she was not supervising them, as well as the screaming I sometimes hear from her house. Other neighbors talked about her abandoning her kids on their property, asking to give her kids lunch because she did not have any food for them. I called CPS and sent them the entire report saying that I think the kids are in danger with the mother and one day will get seriously hurt. Luckily, the kid that was hurt on my property just tripped over a sprinkler head and twisted his ankle instead of being really hurt. All I got from them was that they would look into it and thanked me for my concern. A few days later, I got a knock on my door from a woman from CPS saying that she was asking neighbors if they noticed anything about Karen and her kids. I guess she did not know that I was the one that called in, and I just told her that I always see her leaving her kids with neighbors and screaming in the house, telling us that she has no money to take care of the kids because she is single. She asked me things like if I ever saw the kids with bruises or her hitting the kids. I wasn't gonna lie and told them that I hadn't. She thanked me again and went on her way. I actually thought that since she never did anything like hitting her kids, CPS was not gonna do anything about it, despite the fact that she regularly abandons them with random neighbors. The only reason I noticed CPS taking the kids away was because of how big of a stink Karen was putting up while they did it. She was screaming about how the court gave her custody and not their father, and that she was gonna sue everybody involved. The reports we gave to CPS were anonymous, so Karen did not know who filed the report on her to CPS. The kids ended up going to live with their father instead, while Karen was left without anything to make people feel bad for her about. The only reason anybody helped her before was because we were not gonna take out our hate for her on small kids. Just that they are away from her is good enough for me. Living alone, she moved away somewhere smaller, and the rest of the neighbors could not be more thrilled about it. Goodbye and good riddance, Karen. And yeah, Ripe Stars, it seems like if you have a nice house or a nice pool, or both of those things together, then there is a high chance that entitled people will want to swim in your pool even when you don't want them to. How you deal with the situation, I guess, is up to you. Anyway, the next one is titled, Should Have Given Me Back My Car. So, backstory, before I met my now husband, he was married and divorced. We will call my husband H and his ex-wife D. Theirs was not a marriage of love, but a marriage of financial benefit. He was 19 and she a little older. He was in college, but she could not afford to go. He was able to get grants and some small loans to afford college because his parents were dead broke. Her estranged father made too much money to qualify, so they got married, and the powers that be to no longer considered her parents' income into her ability to pay part of the application for grants. He worked in commercial real estate and went to school part-time. With his income and both their grants and loans, she was able to go to school full-time, and they graduated at the same time. They stayed together through and a little bit after college, although they did not really love each other, they did like each other. He started making a decent living and learned to appreciate the finer things in life. His upwardly mobile career allowed them to buy and sell their first house and then buy a second, nicer home. He also leased them both brand new cars. In early 2000, my husband started to feel like their time together had passed its prime, and she agreed. They started the divorce process, and since her job did not pay that much, ETA, they sold the house for a loss during the divorce process, so nobody got that. He decided to give her, number 1, all the furnishings in their home, paid for by him, number 2, agreement to finish out the remaining months on her very nice SUV's lease in his name and $500 per month. ETA, which, if included the divorce decree, not as a separate agreement attached and referenced in the decree, is considered alimony in our state, regardless if it is called by the name alimony in the decree or not, and as such, can be altered if the supported spouse remarries or either party has a significant change in income. In this case though, she remarried, her marital income more than tripled, and H's income was $0 for, and at the time, unknown period of time. Number 3, half of this not inconsequential savings and retirement accounts, 100% funded by him. She always spent any money she had left after bills on shoes and clothes, never opened or contributed to a savings account. He was very generous, considering our state would not have required that he pay any alimony and only a split of commingled assets, and he had come into the marriage with a small sum of savings he never commingled that he could have kept. They used a divorce-in-the-box type place that does non-contested divorces on the cheap. They were amicably divorced 90 days later, and both dating their future spouses within a few months of that. My husband and I started dating in early 2001, 2 to 3 months after the divorce was final. A year and a half after the divorce, I moved in with my husband and she married her extremely well-off financial boyfriend. Her screw-up came a few months later. My husband really wanted to make an upward job change, different position in the same industry, which would significantly lower his income for a short time. $0 for at least 4 months and then a slow but gradual increase, resulting in significantly more income after about at least a year of ramp-up. My income could just barely cover all of our bills, my soon-to-be car payment, my car was on its last legs and I desperately needed a new car, and his car payment, but I did not have enough to cover his ex-wife's $500 per month car payment. He decided that since Dee was remarried, he should not have to continue paying for it and should be able to take the car back. And that I could drive that instead of buying a new one myself. He thought it was fair and he read his divorce decree and felt it was possible. We consulted a lawyer who agreed that asking for it back was fair, and although it was not written into the divorce decree as alimony, it will likely be treated as such if they ended up going to court. So he had a good chance of winning. H called Dee to explain the situation. He asked her for the SUV back, but she said no and ended the conversation. He called her a week later and asked again, stating that if she still refuses, he will take her to court. She said that she had spoken to her husband and they were not going to give the car back. As an alternative, H asked if they could take over paying all, or at least some of the car payment, as the $500 per month would negatively impact his career advancement. They said they spoke to a lawyer and refused to pay a penny of the payment. On to the next option, which was court. Our lawyer had laid out a plan for doing it without representation, so he went to the courthouse the next day and filed his complaint. And well, a few days later, Dee calls and said she had been summoned by the court and she and her husband wanted to come over and see if they could work something out without going to court. Just great. We figured she had seen that these $500 car payments were basically alimony and she really cannot have her ex-husband paying for her car now that she's remarried. She has seen the light. However, this is r/pro revenge and we know better than that. The night she and her husband came over, their solution was not to give the car back. No, their solution was he turn in the $500 per month vehicle, pay the early lease termination penalty and get her a new 36-month lease on a different, cheaper car, say a $250 one. Considering there were around 18 months left on the $500+ per month one, that would actually cost him more money in the long run with the penalty, and that was a big no. ETA, H just reminded me that we made a third attempt at a compromise. We asked that they take over the payment until the time at which his income returned to the pre-divorce level by agreeing to share his pay stubs on a monthly basis to verify he was still below threshold. Once he was back to earning what was at the end of the marriage, he would take over the payments again. She said, "Well, I talked to a lawyer and he doesn't think you have a snowball's chance in hell of winning in court." H, okay, have a good night. Bye. And out they went, feeling like they won. The revenge, the court date came and H shows up in court. D? Nowhere to be seen. His case gets called, but still no D. The judge reads the complaint, listens to H's story, and makes his judgment, paraphrasing, "I don't think my ruling would be any different had she showed up to court, but we'll never know. I hereby declare a default judgment in favor of the plaintiff." Once H received a printed copy of the judgment, he hatched his plan. Number 1, he called D and told her he won the case and asked her for the keys. She said no and hung up on him. Then he went to the dealership to order 2 new keys and he had the VIN, which I think is the vehicle registration number, and the car was in his, so no problem there. Number 3, he knew where she worked and her schedule. He ordered a tow truck and requested a sheriff's officer at 3:45 for the next afternoon at her work. D-Day 3:45 the next day, 15 minutes before she would finish, he met up with the tow truck driver and the officer in the parking lot of her work. The officer verified the documents and they located and loaded the truck onto the flatbed. They moved the truck to the curb right outside the doors to Dee's work. A little after 4 o'clock, Dee walks out, sees the trio and her car on the truck and freezes in her tracks. This is the paraphrased conversation that followed. D, "But you cannot do that." H hands her the judgment and the officer reiterates the court's judgment. D, "But I talked to Joe. He said you did not have a snowball's chance in hell of winning. Those were Joe's exact words. Snowball's chance." Her voice was slightly cracking. H thinks for a second to try to figure out who Joe was. She had said it like he knew who Joe was, and he tried to figure out a lawyer they both knew named John, but he could only think of their mortgage broker, who was also called John. H, Joe? Joe? Like our mortgage broker Joe? Your lawyer is a mortgage broker? D. Yeah, he said that it wasn't written into the divorce decree as alimony, so you couldn't take it just because I got married. H. Well, the judge may or may not have agreed with you and Joe, but since you never showed up to court, you lost your opportunity to find out. She was left mouth open catching flies. He shook the officer's hand, thanked him for his time, and said to the truck driver, I will meet you back at my house, said goodbye to D, and walked away. Just when H neared his car, she screamed, How am I supposed to get home? He replied, Call that pansy ass of a man you call a husband that was okay with his wife's ex-husband supporting her. They then get back to our house, unload the tow truck, and the driver was laughing his ass off. When he was finished, he said, That was the best thing I've ever been a part of on the job. He ended up discounting the tow by a bit, saying that's to make up for you having to be married to that entitled woman. I sold my SUV within a week and I took over the payments for his ex's car. Their divorce was no longer amicable and we got married, had a kid and lived happily ever after. The moral of the story is, pay for your own crap and don't no-show if you've been summoned to court. Even if you think the plaintiff does not have a snowball's chance in hell of winning. And yeah, ripe stars, I think we have seen it in other stories before that some people think they will just win in court so they don't even show up, which is a pretty stupid thing to do. The next one is titled, I'm allowed on the property, you are not. This happened just this last week and is the only time that I've ever had the police called on me. So, my parents live in an absolutely amazing house with a large amount of lakefront. The neighbors' homes are not nearly as nice, but in general, it is a very wealthy neighborhood. My brother lives with my parents and they all drive nice new vehicles. My mom drives a Porsche Cayenne, my dad has a Subaru Ascent and my brother has a Toyota Tacoma and a BMW M3. I drive a 2001 Honda Civic which has several dents and scratches. It looks incredibly out of place in the neighborhood and especially so at my parents' place. So, I stopped by in the middle of the day to grab some stuff from my parents' place. We are in the process of selling our home and are storing a bunch of stuff in their garage. So, I was rummaging around in the garage, looking through the bins until I found what I was looking for. My GameCube controller and USB adapter, and I loaded up my car and got ready to leave. By the way guys, please post in the comments if you also had a GameCube in the past. That was definitely one of my favorite consoles of all time, and I probably cannot count on one hand anymore how many times I have finished Resident Evil 4. Anyway, when I looked out, I saw that the gate was completely blocked by a truck and a car that I did not recognize. So I hopped back out of the car and approached, and I was told by the older woman and the younger man that the cops had been called. I asked why and was told that I was caught in the act of burglary. I tried to explain that this was my parents' place and that I was just grabbing some of my stuff, but they said that they have seen my parents' kid and know what he drives. So I went back to my car and called my dad and told him that I needed him to come to his place because his neighbors think that I was breaking in. So he was on his way. It took maybe 15 minutes for the cops to show up and they beat my dad by a couple of minutes. I had no issues explaining what was going on and they were definitely on my side. My dad showing up cleared the rest of it up. The cops said that I could press charges for false imprisonment and asked my dad if he wanted to press charges for trespassing, but we chose not to because of the headaches that would clearly cause for my parents. They already had several run-ins with the neighbors, with them using equipment without permission, which is why they had been told not to return to the property by police in the past. And yeah, ripe stars, I gotta say, on the one hand, I can definitely understand why you would not want to press charges if you have a crazy neighbor, because these people just fear that the crazy neighbor would get even crazier. However, that also kind of sends a signal to the neighbor saying that, hey, you can pretty much do whatever you want with these people and there will be no repercussions. If you would be in OP's shoes, what would you have done? Would you have pressed charges for trespassing at least? Please let us know in the comments.